Yes. So as you all must be aware that Center for Wisdom and Leadership is a center of practice established at SPJIMR Institute of Management. And through this center, one of the important objective is to bring researchers who are working in the area of wisdom, leadership development together and create a critical mass of research for us, for practice and to impact practice. And through this objective, we started this research seminar series where we invite leading researchers in wisdom and leadership every month, and they share their findings, they share their research, they also help or inspire different research scholars. So we have several internationally acclaimed and awarded researchers. This time also we are very happy to host Professor Kumar Alok. Professor Kumar Alok is faculty at XLRI, Jamshedpur. I won't be wrong if I call him a Pandit of Sāṁkhya Darshan, and he is very curious about Sāṁkhya Darshan, that how we can leverage it to develop theories. And he has developed certain models of leadership, personality, and organization. His paper on Sattvic leadership, I strongly recommend fellow researchers or research scholars do read that paper. It is published in Journal of Business Ethics, and phenomenal work purely based on Sāṁkhya Darshan. His research has garnered several best paper awards at conferences like NAOP, INDAM. His doctoral dissertation received most promising doctoral dissertation award at Academy of Management conference at Boston 2012. Apart from teaching, he is also involved in management training on leadership, team building, stress management, and he has conducted workshops for over 4,000 participants in public sector, private sector, and even non-profit organization. So we are very pleased and very happy to have you, Professor Kumar. And Professor Kumar will be talking about Indian psychology for personality studies, need, challenges, and future direction. That is the topic of his presentation. For all participants, let me just tell you what is the format of this seminar. So Professor Kumar will share his research in say 40-45 minutes, and then we will open up the forum for Q&A, and it will be more of a free-flowing discussion where you are free to share your thoughts or feedback or even questions to Professor Kumar. So thank you, Professor Kumar, once again, and over to you.
Thank you, Professor Zink. It's my privilege to be here among the fellow researchers and the scholars. So let me just share the basic presentation that I have. So is it visible? Okay.
Yes, it is visible.
Yes. So let me then start the discussions here.
Sorry, yeah, it is visible. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. All right. So let me take you through this work where I examine the study that Indian psychology has contributed, the kind of studies that Indian psychology has contributed for our understanding of personality. So first and foremost, we need to appreciate the fact that the assumptions of the Western models of the personality may not hold good for India. That is the first consideration that we need to have. We may ask why. One of the basic reasons is that the Western conceptions of personality as it started, specifically the Big Five model that we currently talk about, it has a psycholexical tradition where the current 5 factors have been identified by factor analyzing, or rather by principal component analysis of the one-word descriptors of people in English language or any other Western languages. And in Western languages, this has found a 5-factor model. But when the same kind of attempt has been done by Professor Jitendra Singh and Professor Grishwar Mishra and his team, the work published in European Journal of Personality in 2013, they did the same exercise for Hindi language. And what they found is that instead of 5 factors, it is actually 3 factors that is coming. And these 3 factors are very closely resembling what Sāṁkhya Darshan says, Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic. So from a psycholexical perspective also, the assumption compatibility of the Western models of personality and the Indian models of personality may not be there. Another case in point is the introversion extraversion continuum. Our current understanding of how extraversion and introversion as traits are aligned is that they are on a single dimensional continuum. So the more extroverted we are, the less introverted we are. And the more introverted we are, the less extroverted we are. The whole dimension itself is called extraversion as such. So high extraversion denotes extroverted tendencies, and low extraversion denotes introverted tendencies. The problem is that Indian culture as such and several other Eastern cultures, in the past research, they have been shown to be preferring introversion more as compared to extraversion, whereas extraversion is preferred in the Western culture much more. The preference for extraversion is so strong that when the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, version 5, for the American Psychiatric Association was under revision, that was getting prepared, then one of the proposals before them was to declare introversion as a psychological disorder. It is another matter that they did not finally accept it, they did not finally take it, but nevertheless, this was presented because extraversion is considered as a mark of healthy mind, whereas introversion was considered as a mark of perhaps a depressed mind. In Indian thought, that would be exactly opposite. Most of us perhaps would have been scolded by our parents during childhood if we talk too much, whereas talkativeness is one of the factors of extraversion. So culturally itself, in India, the way we value these two dimensions, that itself is something that is not shared. Besides, if we look for the characterization of various characters in our traditional literature, whether we talk about how Ram or Ravan or Yudhishthir or any of the Pandavas or any of the other characters present in the Ramayana or Mahabharata that we have popularly that we know and that have contributed to development of Indian culture, we can't really find somebody who is essentially introverted. We can't also find somebody who is essentially extroverted. So these people, all these various characters that are present in Ramayana and Mahabharata, they appear to take a stand that whenever there is a need to talk or socialize, they are able to do it. And whenever there is a need to introspect, meditate, maybe get into seclusion and do their austerities or practices, they are able to withdraw their mind and they are able to do that. So therefore, instead of taking a dispositional perspective to introversion or extraversion, it appears that Indian cultural traditions, as evident in its literature, has not really considered these two as a dispositional characteristic as such. And therefore, finding extraversion or introversion in the characters of Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. is very difficult. We find same character expressing both of these kind of tendencies in different situations. So going ahead with the Western models of personality may not be the best thing for India. And therefore, Indian psychology becomes better positioned to support Indian models of personality. The core point is that Indian psychology is rooted in classical Indian thought, what we call darshan. And darshan typically, darshan has a Sanskrit root called drisir prekshane, intense observation. Because of the focus on intense observation and because of the focus on lived experiences, that any preceptor of any original preceptor of a darshan must have realized the truths of one's system of darshan, and those are the truths that are available for the entire posterity. All human beings at all point in time are capable of realizing those truths. That is the fundamental position of darshan. So in that case, the emphasis on scientific validity, the emphasis on going by intense observations, the emphasis on proper examination of the concepts as well as the evidence, that is much stronger in Indian psychology or in darshan as compared to the Western models, where we have simply assumed that the personality descriptors are present in language and from there we have proceeded. Whereas the linguistic differences are also plenty. The way Indian languages are there, that's not the same way in which Western languages have been organized. So therefore, threefold focus for the present research. One is that the examination of the need of Indian psychology for personality studies Second is, what are the challenges of liberating Sāṁkhya philosophy for that? And third is to look into some of the possible future directions. So let me quickly take you through these elements. The first and foremost thing that we can consider here is the issue of what is Indian psychology as such and why it is needed. So if you look into how Professor Rao and Professor Paranjape in their work, they have defined what is known as Indian psychology. So they consider Indian psychology as that which utilizes and incorporates concepts, categories, and models derived from thought native to the Indian subcontinent and practices that have been developed and preserved for centuries. So that's the idea. It's not necessarily an indigenous psychology as such. It is Indian psychology. So there is a possibility of universal application, but nevertheless, unlike the mainstream psychology, where universal application is assumed already, Indian psychology, considering its rooting in darshan, it is more about examined. Universal application needs to be examined, and wherever it is found, it needs to be accepted, rather than just taking it as on the basis of assumption itself. So, three important grounds, as I already shared, for the need for Indian psychology. One is that Indian system of thought emphasizes evidence-based thinking, and they also emphasize living espoused truths. And the psychological lexical studies indicate influence of Indian thought on Indian languages. Example, the Sāṁkhya influence on Hindi that I already shared about Professor Jiten Singh and Professor Girishwar Mishra's work. So based on this need, let us look into what are the different ways in which the idea of personality has been explored in multiple systems. The first and foremost thing that we need to understand here is that the models of self, what is self and what is personality, and what are their interrelationships? This question is not very clear in the current social psychology and personality psychology. It is another matter that there are some differences that one can nevertheless observe. What differences and which is more fundamental, self or personality, etc. Those are the kind of questions. And if personality is not self, then what exactly it is? So those are the kind of questions that are not entirely clear in the present systems. For example, social psychology as a discipline focuses more on study of self, whereas personality psychology as a discipline focuses more on study of personality. And then we have Journal of Social and Personality Psychology, JPSP, Personality and Social Psychology. So in that case, what would be the focus? That becomes a confusing element. Similarly, whenever we talk about self, we talk about malleable self. Whereas when we talk about personality, we talk about relatively enduring dispositional characteristics. Similarly, when impact of self on behavior is examined, typically the models advanced in social psychology are motivational models. So what are the fundamental motives of self because of which self has any influence on behavior or external world as such? For example, self-enhancement motive, self-regulatory motive, etc., or self-consistency motive. These are the multiple kinds of motives that social psychology has generated. Personality, on the other hand, offers a dispositional explanation of behaviors. So these differences we have, but still, if somebody has to ask that which is more fundamental, is self more fundamental or is personality more fundamental? What amount of redundancy personality and self share when we consider their influence on behavior? These are not very easy questions to answer, because as of now, conceptually, these things are not clear. But when it comes to Indian psychology, and when it comes to darshan-based understanding of how do we understand these differences between self and personality, we have more or less a very clear idea of what qualifies as self and what qualifies as personality. So, for example, if we consider Vedanta darshan, from the perspective of Vedanta darshan, we have conceptualization of three different kinds of self. One kind of self is what we call the transcendental self, or in Sanskrit, Nirupadhik Chaitanya. Another name for that is Atma. One that is absolutely unconditioned, entirely Upadhi Rahit. There is nothing external that is imposed to that. There is no association as such with anything that is non-self. So perfect self as such. That is called Atma. Now, at the level of Atma, Anyway, there is no conception of personhood as such. So question of personality will anyway not come. Then the next level is what we call the conditioned self. Or in Sanskrit, we call that Jiva. So what is Jiva? Jiva is Sopadhit Chaitanya. The Upadhi is Adhyatma. Upadhi of Jiva is known as Adhyatma. So Atma associated with Adhyatma is what we call Jiva. The metaphorical association of Atma with Adhyatma. Now, what is Adhyatma? Adhyatma refers to the set of 13 or 14 subtle organs that are present in the subtle body that we have as per the Vedantic and Sāṁkhya conceptions. So, Panch Gyanendriya, 5 sense organs, Panch Karmendriya, 5 motor organs, then Antahkaran Chatushti in Vedanta, and 3 Antahkaranas in Sāṁkhya. So, Mana, Ahankar, Buddhi, and Chitta. So, if we consider that entire set, that is known as Adhyatma. So, Jiva is when Adhyatma gets associated with Atma. Adhyatma becomes the Upadhi of Atma. So, in that case, Jiva becomes conditioned self. Now, for conditioned self, it is still meaningful because the idea of personhood may now come. So, therefore, it is possible to talk about personality for Jiva, but certainly not possible to talk about personality for Atma. And then there is a third level of self that we call reflexive self, which is about Ahankar, which is one of the Antahkaran, the internal organ, whose job, whose function is Abhiman, converting mine into me. Whatever is mine, the Antahkaran that converts into me and generates a self-concept which includes that is called Ahankar. Abhimano Ahankara, as the Sāṁkhya Karika says, 24th Karika. So in that case, we have 3 different kinds of self. One is the Atma, other is Jiva, and the third is Ahankar. So if we consider the Western models of self, they are more about, or the malleable self that we are calling about in social psychology, that would be more relevant for reflexive self, that is the Ahankar, the function of Ahankar. So the way Ahankar functions, that generates sense of me and mine, it is that which is the base for generating the conception of self that we have. Whereas, if we consider Vedantic models of personality that have been worked, for example, works of Professor Anand Paranjape, where he has developed the 5 Seath model of personality. So if you consider 5 Seath model of personality, these 5 sheets are given in the Taittiriya Upanishad of Krishna Yajurveda, where the definitions that are provided, not only Taittiriya Upanishad, later it also comes in the Pangala Upanishad of Shukla Yajurveda. So it is many Upanishad texts have these 5 models: the Annamaya Kosh, the Pranamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh, Vijnanamaya Kosh, and Anandamaya Kosh. The 5 different seats. So if you consider the 5 seat model, the 5 seats are not actually a model of personality per se. These 5 sheets will be applicable for Jiva, neither for Ahankar nor for Atma. And out of these 5 sheets, the Adhyatma component, that is the Gyanendriya, Karmendriya, and Antahkaran, this is applicable only for 2 seats, which is about Vijnanamaya and Manomaya. Neither Anandamaya, which is Ahankar, which is the Agyan, Swat, as the Pangala Upanishad says, Swagyan Rupam Anandamayo Kosha. So ignorance of self, that itself is called Anandamaya Kosh. So that is Swagyan, ignorance of oneself. Now Agyan is not Adhyatma. Similarly, when we consider Annamaya Kosh, body, the physical body, that physical body is also not Adhyatma as such. Similarly, Pranamaya Kosh, Pran is also not considered as a part of Adhyatma, because Pran is defined as the common vritti or the sadharan functioning, sadharan vritti or the common functioning of all antahkaranas together, all karanas. So that general function of antahkaran, which is all pervasive throughout the body and among the entire adhyatma, that is known as pran. So in that case, that is also not considered as adhyatma as such. So the conception of Jiva or the 5 Seath model of personality would not qualify as a model of personality, but it can qualify as a model of self, because self is applicable for either Atma or for Jiva or for Ahankar. So in that case, the 5 Sheath model becomes more relevant for the Jiva. rather than for the personality. Similarly, there are other models that are developed based on Nyaya Vaisheshik or Jain system, or even the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo system. So these multiple models, they qualify more for models of self rather than for personality. Therefore, in this research, I have not really looked into that because my focus is on personality. For study of personality, three major streams are there. One is Ayurveda. Ayurveda, we have the text like Sushrut Samhita, where two fundamental concepts come. One is about Deha Prakriti and other is about Sattva Prakriti. So Deha Prakriti is about association with physical body. And in that case, what are the different ways in which dispositional characteristics can manifest through physical body? This Deha Prakriti comprises the doshas, the Kapha, Vata and Pitta that Ayurveda says. So based on their various combinations, multiple kind of tendencies and dispositions get generated and expressed through the bodies. So this also is not something that we can consider as swabhav as such, or personality, if you have to refer to something that is biological, but also psychological. So there are a lot of elements in the Deha Prakriti part that will not qualify as a model of personality as such. For example, Brahmakaya, as Sushrut Samhita says, 16 different kinds of Deha Prakriti. So one of the kind is called Brahmakaya. So here there is a tendency to also engage in performance of yajnas, performance of regular worship, etc. So while these may not be the idea of a dispositional characteristics, because these are all highly specific actions rather than taking the disposition as such. So Deha Prakriti is actually not a model of personality per se, but Sattva Prakriti can be. And when it comes to Sattva Prakriti, it refers to the Antahkaran tendencies, tendency of the Buddhi. And in that way, it is more or less similar to Sāṁkhya and the concept of triguṇa. Buddhism, when we consider, Buddhism does not consider self. And here, again, our understanding of difference between self and personality becomes very, very clear. So Buddhism has the anatta as the fundamental doctrine, non-self. But nevertheless, it also accepts that people may appear similar. Why do they appear similar? Because a directionality of the dispositional factors or internal factors that may keep moving or keep producing similar kind of effects. Therefore, just like a flame, burning flame of a candle, where every moment the wax or the oil gets dissolved and burned, and new drop of wax or oil is actually climbing the wick. But nevertheless, to the onlooker, it gives the impression as if it is the same flame that has been burning for past half an hour or 1 hour. So considering that dynamic framework for personality, the Abhidhamma Pitak of Bodh Darshan, based on the text called, based on the philosophical school or Darshanic school in the Buddhism of Mahayana, that is known as Pudgalvad. So that text has conceptualization for different kind of Sahavas, but then the perspective is primarily from the point of view of those who are practicing Buddhism, in the sense, what kind of Swabhav will facilitate Buddhist practices, living life as a Buddhist monk, or enabling any of these Ashtanga marg that Buddha has propounded. So how do we practice Buddhism? What is conducive to us and what is not conducive to us? Based on that, that idea of Swabhav is developed. So that also is highly focused and not general as such. Therefore, we identify that it is the Sāṁkhya darshan that has become the mainstay. Majority of the research in personality has happened only in the tradition of Sāṁkhya. And triguṇa, sattva, rajas, tamas, has been the main personality construct here. So the fundamental, that's the fundamental idea. Now, what are they and how some improvement is required? What are the challenges that we are going to discuss now? So when we consider Sāṁkhya-based research, initial work started as far back as in 1938 when a PhD thesis was submitted based on triguṇa. So it's not something that new that we are talking about. But nevertheless, all through in this entire journey of about, say, about 80 or 90 plus years of researching Sāṁkhya for generating personality related ideas, there have been one consideration that is absolutely common or that have been persistent throughout. And what are those? That is what we are going to discuss now. Number one is what we call the imposed ethic bias, which is about interpreting native realities using alien frameworks. It's a anthropological term. So we are just discussing based on that. What are those impository biases that are marring the progress of personality studies based on Sāṁkhya? The number one is the question of epistemological bias. See, the way triguṇa is conceptualized in Sāṁkhya. Triguṇa means sattva, rajas, tamas. The 12th verse of the Sāṁkhya Karika says, Priti or Priti Vishādatmaka. Because the fundamental purpose of Sāṁkhya is to explain things from the perspective of Purush. How Purush can achieve liberation. How the Bhog Purusharth and Moksha Purusharth can be attained. Sāṁkhya Darshan seeks to elaborate on that. Therefore, the perspective is Purush. So, one idea is that how Sattva, Rajas and Tamas are experienced for Purush. So, from the experiential perspective, definition of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas is given. And this definition is what we call Swarup Lakshan, which means these are the very constitutive or these are the very definitional properties of what they are. So what are they? Sattva refers to Priti, satisfactory or pleasant experiences. Rajas refers to Apriti, dissatisfaction, cause of dissatisfaction or cause of satisfaction. Sattva, cause of dissatisfaction, Rajas, and cause of delusion, that is known as, or unconcerned, that is what we call tamas, moh, sukh, dukh and moh. So these are the Swarup Lakshan, the whole intrinsic nature of what triguṇa are. And then there is a prabhav, influence. What is that they do? So Priti or Priti Vishādatmaka, and then the 12th verse goes on saying Prakash Pravriti Niyamartha. So Sattva illuminates, Rajas puts us into action, it makes us engage into action, and Tamas controls both illumination and actions. Now, this is the broad translation of these in English. The problem that happens is that triguṇa, what are triguṇa? As of now, if you look into that, the way they are used in the personality psychology, triguṇa are, in Sāṁkhya, triguṇa are the material cause. Whereas in personality psychology, triguṇa have been reduced to the status of efficient cause. To understand what I'm talking about, let us consider the metaphor of, or the example of, a clay, or rather an earthen pot, and the potter. So potter is one who makes the pot, whereas clay is what becomes the pot. So clay is the material cause of pot, whereas potter is the efficient cause of pot. So Darshan says, Sāṁkhya Darshan says that Sattva, Rajas, Tamas are the material cause. They constitute the whole things, whole world that exists and that changes. Everything that exists and is undergoing change is triguṇātmak. Whereas science has put a restriction that we will consider only efficient causation as the causation. X influences Y, not X becomes Y. To suit this efficient causation framework of Sāṁkhya, of science, what the researchers have done in personality psychology is that they started considering Sattva, Rajas and Tamas and Sattvik, Rajasic and Tamasic as adjectives of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Whereas in Sāṁkhya Darshan, Sattvik is the effect of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, Sattva. Whereas Rajasic is the effect of Rajas and Tamasic is the effect of Tamas. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas are cause and Sattvik, Rajasic, Tamasic are their effects. And the fundamental principle of epistemological principle of Satkaryavad means cause and effect are essentially same, just that specificity has increased in the effect. Just like clay and pot are essentially same. Same clay has taken the form of a pot, an earthen pot, but the form is the addition that has been is the emergent characteristic that the pot has acquired. After the pot is destroyed, again pot becomes clay. Similarly, whenever Sattvik, Rajasic, Tamasic are getting back to their causes, they again become Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. But in case it is converted as an adjectives to suit the efficient causation, then what happens? let us consider a simple example. Let's consider that we have a glass of water. And if we say hot water, hotness is the adjective of this water. If we say cold water, coldness or coolness is the adjective of the water. Now, it is entirely possible for water to be there, but not be either hot or cold, which means if attributes are removed, still the substance will remain. So causation is the issue of substance, whereas adjectives are the issue of attributes only. So ontological bias is also introduced, converting substance to attribute. Therefore, what happens? The idea of triguṇa as the personality construct that we have taken for granted for almost 80-90 years, we have been researching that. Essentially, what we have done, we have changed the way their epistemology works, we have changed the way their ontology works, and then converted that to suit our own purposes. So any representation of triguṇa in Indian psychological personality studies with Sāṁkhya darshan is actually today is just a matter of coincidence. Nothing more than that. Because the idea of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, what it is there in the Sāṁkhya and what it is there in the Indian personality studies, they are absolutely different, fundamentally and philosophically different as such. As a result, what are the challenges that comes to us? The challenge, number one challenge is that our understanding of what Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, that itself is confused entirely because of the ontological and epistemological changes. So what is happening? Wessler and Motegi, these two scholars, they translated or they prepared a critical edition of one of the most important commentaries on Sāṁkhya Karika, traditional commentaries on Sāṁkhya Karika, called Yukti Deepika. So they are scholars of high standing in the philosophy tradition, in the philosophy. And now what has happened? These scholars, when they started looking at the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, in their writing, they say, we still find it intriguing to understand why should pleasure need not be passion, because Rajas is translated as passion. So why should Sattva, Priti, should also not be considered as passion, because for us that both of them are just emotions. So Sattva and Rajas, whether there are differences or not, we can't say. Similarly, considering them as dullness, inertia, etc., or translating them as illumination, activation, etc. So these different kind of translations are also not able to capture what Sāṁkhya darshan is saying, because these are attribute-based translations, not the substance-based. So in that case, what is happening? People are not able to really understand what is going on. And if people are not able to understand what is going on, neither in the philosophy literature they are able to understand it, nor in the Indian psychological literature they are able to understand it. So we have 6 different ways of looking at personality, the trigunas. For example, there are scholars, majority of the scholars have looked at triguṇa as personality types straight away. Looking at triguṇa as personality type. Some are looking at triguṇa as behavioral tendencies. Some are looking at triguṇa as mental dispositions. And similarly, different scholars take different stand on that. The biggest challenge comes in conceptualizing triguṇa in terms of personality is that Bhagavad Gita and Sāṁkhya darshan says that all our actions can also be sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. So in that case, what happens? Sattva, Rajas, Tamas constitute our actions. Therefore, they are sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. Whereas if we consider Sattva, Rajas, Tamas themselves as personality traits, in that case, what happens? Personality will not become actions. Personality can only influence actions. But if we define triguṇa as personality, in that case, personality should become action, which is meaningless. So such meaningless idea is actually present in the Indian psychological literature because of misunderstanding of the way these ideas are presented. And thus, one of the reasons for that is evading traditional scholarship, where we are looking at the distorted modern scholarship and relying almost entirely on translations. So this has created all these problems. So Dr. Radhakrishnan, for example, translates guna as quality. Now, quality means attributes, whereas gunas are substances. If you look into traditional scholarship, you do not see any of these confusions at all. Acharya Vachaspati Misra, for example, he writes in his commentary, Tattva Kaumudi commentary on the Sāṁkhya Karika, he says that Sattva and Rajas both are bhav padarth. That means both are real existents, ontological reals. Why? Because if we do not consider them ontological reals, That means we have to consider pleasure as absence of pain and pain as absence of pleasure. The consequence will be that when we don't have one, we don't have both. Pleasure is absence of pain, pain is absence of pleasure. That means we don't have both. Neither we have pleasure nor we have pain. That is one undesirable contingency. And then there is a realization that all of us can reflect back on our experiences and understand that we can simultaneously experience pleasure and pain both. Simultaneous experience can only happen if both of these are real existents. So, for example, when Dhritarashtra is saying in Mahabharata, when Sanjay has narrated to him the great valors of Abhimanyu, how he is decimating the Kaurav armies, then Dhritarashtra says, Dvaidhi bhavati me chittam hiya tushtaya cha Sanjaya. My heart, as if, my mind or my entire antakaran, as if is divided into two. Why? On the one hand, I am very, very happy because my grandson is single-handedly decimating the whole armies, extraordinary valor. And on the other hand, I'm extremely unhappy. Why? Because those decimated armies are of my sons. So I'm not able to make up my mind, as if my heart has been divided into two. That is the condition that we are talking about. So when simultaneous experience of both is present, why should pleasure be one kind of passion? They are not talking about emotions at all. They are talking about something that is the constitutive property of the whole world. So in this context, darshan has not been translated to psychological studies properly. So what are the ways in which some future directions can actually develop? One option is developing an epistemology of material causation for science. Now that after David Hume, science has agreed that it will only consider efficient form of causation as the only causation. X influences Y. That is the only way of causation science is going to look into. And prior to that, material causation and other forms of causation were also within the framework. So in that case, if you want to understand it, one way for us scholars in the Indian psychology is that we develop an epistemology of material causation so that it can be used in science. Now, this kind of idea, as Thomas Kuhn has shown in his work on paradigms, that this faces legitimacy threats. Indian psychology as a discipline itself has been suffering from a lack of legitimacy for almost several decades now, 3-4 decades. So in that case, if we offer entirely different epistemology, then our acceptance within the framework of science and its publication in the scientific journals, that becomes challenged. Second option is develop an epistemology of efficient causation for triguṇa. If we do that we convert triguṇa from material cause to efficient cause, in that case, we face the threat of fundamental departure from Sāṁkhya darshan as such. So no fidelity with the original text will remain. Then the third option that is only left to us is leveraging such Sāṁkhya ideas that reflect on personality through the logic of efficient cause. So our idea was that what is that which will make somebody perform actions or thought, something that controls thinking, feeling, and actions of a person. What accounts for that? And Sāṁkhya darshan defines it. Sāṁkhya Karika, 23rd Karika says, Adhyavsayo buddhi. So buddhi is one of the antakaran that determines what an experience is, and then also determines what to do in that regard. So thinking, feeling, and actions, all the three are determined by the functioning of buddhi. Therefore, when Bhagavad Gita defines 8th chapter 3rd verse, defines swabhav in terms of adhyatma, swabhavo adhyatmam uchyate, and buddhi is adhyatma. So in that case, we consider from the perspective of Sāṁkhya that buddhi itself is the seat of swabhav, and for buddhi, sattva and prakriti, these terms continuously appear in texts like Bhagavad Gita, and the commentaries are also considering buddhi as the form of as the one that influences thinking, feeling, and action of everything that any living being is doing. So in that case, the modes of functioning of buddhi, that becomes the different forms of bhav. The modes of buddhi functions in 8 different modes. 4 modes are sattvic, 1 mode is rajasic, and 3 modes are tamasic. So dharmo, jnanam, virag, aishwaryam. Dharma, jnana, virag, and aishwarya. These are the 4 sattvikam etad rupam. These are the 4 different ways of expression of buddhi, sattvic ways. And then tamsam asmad vipurajastam. So opposite of dharma is adharma, that is tamasic. Opposite of virag is rag, that is rajasic. Opposite of jnana is ajnan, that is tamasic. And opposite of aishwarya is anaishwarya, that is again tamasic. So total 8 different bhavas. These are the 8 ways in which buddhi can function. And scholars have indicated earlier, Sankhya scholars have suggested that these 8 ways essentially are the efficient cause only of our actions. Because if our buddhi is functioning according to the mode of dharma at any given moment, then we are likely to engage into such actions, such thinking, feeling, and actions that promote well-being of self as well as others. Whereas when buddhi is functioning in the mode of adharma, from the adharma bhava, then we are likely to engage in such thinking, feeling, and action that is harmful to us as well as also to others. So the way bhavas are conceptualized, they are the efficient causes. And considering a particular combination of bhav, that is what we call swabhav. So in that way, bhav perspective is the way in which Sāṁkhya-based scholarship in personality can progress in future. It can maintain the integrity of source thought, that is Sāṁkhya darshan, while doing good science. If we continue to work based on triguṇa perspective, if we continue to work based on guna idea and consider guna as personality, then throughout we will continue to face the same problems that we have faced in these 80 years, where even today the very definition of what is sattva, rajas, and tamas is neither clear to the Western philosophers who translate works in their languages, neither it is clear to any of the Indian psychology scholars in their published works. So they are not able to take a clear position that this is exactly what it means, primarily because the whole epistemology and ontology is changed. So that is the core challenge on working on triguṇa, based on the thought that triguṇa itself can become a personality idea. So time has come when we need to give up triguṇa as the personality idea and instead look at how as the personality, or the something much deeper. So when we consider the term swabhav, it is not just personality, what we appear, the appearances, persona, mask. It is not how we appear to others. Swabhav is what we intrinsically are internally. And even if we consider us as a jiva, that concept, still the adhyatma part will be the part of for the jiva who is a person. The adhyatma part will constitute swabhav, and the atma part will constitute self. So self and personality distinction is simultaneously made. If we consider reflexive self or self of Western psychology, that would be that will be something that is more exterior as compared to swabhav, because that is the functioning of ahankar, which emanates from buddhi. So therefore, bhav perspective is the way forward that can address the epistemological issues, the ontological issues, and help us understand how personality can progress using Sāṁkhya thought. Thank you very much. If you have any questions that we can discuss.
Thank you so much, Professor Kumar. It was very fascinating and very inspiring seminar. And I request our participants, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Siddharth has put up a question in the chat. After that, Banajit has raised hand. So, and let me also share that we have several industry leaders and practitioners, managers, leading business leaders have joined us. So very warm welcome to all of them. And please feel free to join this discussion and share your thoughts or questions with Professor Kumar. Yes. So Siddharth's question first, then Banajit, and then anybody who is free to.
Siddharth has asked about, can you please repeat the 8 ways of action? So the 8 different modes of buddhi as it is there in the Sāṁkhya darshan. So 23rd Sāṁkhya Karika, 23rd verse, that says dharma, jnana, virag, aishwarya. So aishwarya, dharma is about seeking well-being of self and others. Jnana is about seeking genuine experiences, evidence-based thinking. So genuine experiences not only of material nature but also of spiritual nature. So moksha component, bahya jnana and abhyantar jnana, both are the component of jnana. Then there is virag, non-detachment, absolutely, that part. And then there is a the fourth one, that is Aishwarya, which is the Aishwaryam Apratihāt Lakshanam. Acharya Gaudapad, when he has commented on this verse in his Gaudapad Acharya commentary, he says Aishwaryam Apratihāt Lakshanam. Aishwarya means unimpeded influence. That I want to exercise influence in such a way that whatever I will must happen. My will must be fulfilled. That is the way. Strong willpower. Trying to influence the outcomes or change everything. Everything should happen as per me, as per my will. So that tendency, that is the Aishwarya part. And then the opposite parts are just opposite, functionally opposite, but ontologically separately existing. So every human being will have all 8 bhavas, but when one bhava functions, its opposite can't function at the same time.
So just confirming, Sattvic is Dharma, Viraga, Gyan and Aishwarya.
Yes.
And Rajasic is
Raga.
Tamasic is Adharma and
Adharma, Agyan and Anaishwarya.
And Rajasic is
Rag.
Rag.
Rajo Ragatmukam Vidhi, Trishna Sangha Samudva, Bhagavad Gita also says.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Manojit.
Yeah. I have a question. Like you have beautifully mentioned that Trigun conceptualization in Indian psychology is not the way it should be. So it has some problem. Basically, you are saying it is not a personality quality, rather it is a material thing. So my question is whether, like, we know that light has dual nature, like it can be both wave and particle. So can Trigun be something like that? And another thing I would like to ask that if Trigun is like matter, so we also know that Ishwar is Nirgun and Trigunati. So there is something beyond the 3 gunas like Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So yeah, so can we fit that also into the picture? Yeah.
Yes. Already this is established in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 20th and 21st verse. If you look into that explicitly says Karya Karan Kartritva Hetu Prakriti Ruchate. That's the definition of Prakriti.
5.
And then it also says in the same verse, Purusha Sukha Dukhanam Bhoktritva Hetu Ruchate. So Purush is that which enjoys pleasure and pain.
Yes.
Why is it so? Because whenever we are experiencing something from outside, let us say that I am looking at an object. Now that object my eyes are capturing, the information of that object in terms of Netrendriya enters the mind, Manas. Now Mana generates multiple options regarding that. Sankalpatmako Mana, that's the definition of Manas in Sāṁkhya. So Mana generates multiple options regarding that. Whether it is this, whether it is that, whether it is that. So 2-3 different options are quickly generated. Now when then Ahankar associates with those generated options, Madartha evam Vishaya, it is for me that these options are generated. So once for me these options are generated, that idea comes. Ahankar has functioned. Then whichever part Ahankar has now got associated, now Buddhi starts functioning. That's why it is called Adhyavasaya, Adhikritasya Avasana. So that which is acquired by Ahankar will now be determined by Buddhi. So now Buddhi determines that out of those 3 options, whether I know this object, whether I do not know this object, have I experienced this before? So now those doubts are settled. Buddhi has reached to the conclusion that I am seeing at this for the first time. This is the final determination that happens at the level of Buddhi. Now, when this happens, if it is agreeable, if that knowledge is agreeable to me, the Purush, the knower, then that is experienced as Sukh. If that knowledge is disagreeable to me, that is experienced as Dukh. So Ishwar, because Purush is metaphorically associated, as Yuktidipika says, Drishya Darshan. Whenever we say that something is to be seen, that means seer must be there. If Drishya is there, that means Drashta has to be there. Similarly, if Drashta is there, Drishya must be there. These two are metaphorically interdependent, always. This metaphorical interdependence itself is called bondage. That is the bandhan. Metaphorical bandhan, not true bandhan. So because of this identification, the bandhan is getting created. So breaking this out in Sāṁkhya Darshan, that will be called as Anadimukta Purush, Ishwar. Ishwar is one who is eternally free, never got into this Drishya Darshan trap. So that means Ishwar is eternally free from this, metaphorical bondage, and therefore Ishwar becomes the Updeshta for Moksha. So Purve Sham Guru Kale Navachedat, Yoga Darshan, the Guru of all Gurus, who is beyond time. So that is the definition of Ishwar. Therefore, Ishwar has to be away from the Trigunas. Ishwar has to be away from the Trigunas because one of the meaning of Gun is bondage. Gun means ropes, strands of rope. So that which binds Purush to the experiences of the world, that is what is known as Gun. So these are three strands of a rope, therefore they are called Triguna. So Ishwar is eternally free from that, therefore Ishwar is Trigunatīt. Purush is also Trigunatīt, but then Purush is metaphorically associating itself with the Triguna, therefore experiencing all the pleasure and pain, whereas Ishwar is not. And that is what is indicated in the Atharvaved Shruti in Mundaka-upanishad, Dva Suparna Savija Sakhaya Samanam Vriksham Parkhas Swajate. Two birds sitting on the same branch. One is eating the bitter or sour fruits, bitter or sweet fruits here and there, and the other is just watching. So the watching bird is what we call Ishwar, whereas the one who is experiencing these, that is known as Jiva. So that is where the differences are there. Ishwar is always free from that. That's why Ishwar is called Trigunatīt. Purush is also Trigunatīt as such, and therefore Ishwar in Yoga Darshan and Sāṁkhya Darshan is Purush Vishesho Ishwara. Klesh Karma Vimaka Ashayir or Paramrishti Purush Vishesho Ishwara. Yoga Darshan, first chapter, 25th verse. Aphorism. So all these different modifications are of the Trigun itself. Klesh, Panch Kleshas are the modifications of Trigun. Similarly, Karma is a modification of Trigun, effects of Trigun. Similarly, Vipak, the results of Karma is also Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, again Trigunatmak. And Ashay, Sanskar, Karma Bandhat. So Sanskar is also Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, again Karma, Trigun. So this entire thing, Aparamishta, something that is beyond all these, that is known as Ishwar, and that is Purush Vishesh, not a separate Tattva, but one special kind of Purush who is always Anadi, always free, eternally. So therefore that can be discussed within the same context.
Okay. Yeah.
Great. Anybody has other question? Okay, I have two questions. Okay. One is more for our PhD scholars, and one is conceptual. I will first ask for scholars that you refer to scriptures like even we cannot refer to literature so easily that this chapter, this verse, and you brought Mahabharata, you brought Sāṁkhya Karika, you brought Bhagavad Gita, and that too Bhagavad Gita, not typically chapter 2, verse 46, Karmanyavadhikara. All these are like बहुत ही घिसे पिटे होते हैं, but then you brought in very typical verses. How? So my question from a PhD scholar point of view is how to approach these scriptures. Is there a way you can suggest that if somebody wants to pursue research in this kind of concept, and he or she wants to refer, let us say, Sāṁkhya Karika or Bhagavad Gita to begin with, what is a better approach which will not dilute the topic to approach the scriptures? Yeah,
that's a very good question. I would say that there are different ways in which this has been done. Number one way in which this is done is by going through translations. And if we go through translations of these texts, because these are definitional terms, we will invariably suffer from those the imposed dative biases. So our results will never be able to generate something that has a high fidelity with the source darshan. So therefore, relying on translation is certainly not a good idea. If at all one can't have any other way, then one should rely on Indian translations, not in English, but in Indian languages. If we have good understanding of our own native language, whichever language that we are talking about, that language would capture these terms in a much better way as compared to any general idea. Second, Professor Kiran Kumar in Mysore University, now he has of course retired, great stalwart of Indian psychology. Yeah. So he and his team conducted an epistemological analysis etymological analysis of Sattva Tamas, and then determined that these three terms have so many meanings that it is very difficult to determine that what exactly is the meaning of these terms. Now the point here is that we need to understand that etymological analysis in Sanskrit is permitted for only those words where Shabda Shakti that is the power, the meaning of the word that it is supposed to come, is actually lakshanik, means Abhidha, Lakshana, Vyanjana, 3 different ways in which any word can provide any meaning. So when there is a denotative meaning, whatever is said, same way it is understood, that is called Abhidha. But when there is a connotative meaning, then we look into Lakshana. So ascertaining Lakshana meaning, we can get into the etymological analysis. But definitional terms do not have Lakshana meaning at all. Sāṁkhya, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas are so fundamental to the concept of Sāṁkhya that Bhagavad Gita tells them Guna Saṅkhyana, Prachyate Guna Saṅkhyana. So Sāṁkhya itself is called Guna Saṅkhyan there. Sāṁkhya and Guna are one and the same, essentially. So Sāṁkhya has taken care of giving their Swarup Lakshan, giving their Tathast Lakshan, that is their core definition, their effect, and also what we call the Swarup, Swabhav, and Prabhav in Sanskrit. All three have been very carefully elaborated. None of the traditional commentators till date has ever disputed the definition of Triguna. So there is a fundamental agreement regarding what Triguna means in traditional scholarship. But there is a fundamental disagreement regarding what they mean in whether we consider Western literature on philosophy itself, Sāṁkhya translations in philosophy, or Indian psychological literature. No two scholars agree. So why does that happen? Because they have relied on denying completely the traditional scholarship. So what is the way in which scholars can develop really good scholarship, traditional scholarship, in less time? The simplest way is that if they can approach a local scholar in their vicinity, these days it is possible even through Zoom or any other way, someone who is a traditional scholar, who has studied Sāṁkhya through the tradition, Gurukul tradition, not in universities. Universities tradition is suffering from impositive bias, so that will not help us at all. But still there are thousands of scholars in various parts of the countries that are still pursuing these traditional Indian knowledge through traditional method. So in that case, if you are able to work with any such people, if we sit with them even for 4, 5 months, 6 months, we will be able to develop penetrating insights regarding our core question. We will not be able to master Sāṁkhya. That will take a lifetime. But what is that we wanted to understand? If you wanted to understand how bhavas work or how Triguna works, that idea, in a matter of few months, it's possible that working with them, they will be able to help us. Other way is that if you can collaborate with one of them, it's not very common that they are actually very well versed in English. For example, when I was doing content validation for my work, then I can share, because there's no shame in sharing that, when I shared that entire framework as well as the list of my Swabhav questionnaire to the scholars for testing, it took me about 1.5 years. In the content validation stage itself, every other stage happened quickly, but experts we are not getting. So one expert, one noted Indian psychology expert, wrote back saying, is this, just one line question, is this Sāṁkhya or is this Alok? So which means that somebody who has worked on Triguna for 30 years has not really understood anything regarding Triguna. Because when a genuine scholarship is presented, which is directly lifted from Sāṁkhya sources, then people are not able to recognize it. So this is something that we have to understand. So in that case, what happens? I had to go to traditional scholars. Now their problem was that people with whom I could interact, they had no understanding of English. So either I talk to them in local language or I discuss with them in Sanskrit in some way. Otherwise, discussion or discourse will not happen. So collaboration, that is the challenge. But that is also a quicker way. If we can collaborate with somebody who is also conversant with English, and then we work with these people and produce a joint work, maybe a part of, maybe in doctoral thesis, such person can be. So in that case, the effort spent in learning that system becomes reduced. We have a direct guidance available and we can learn in the more authentic way. The other slightly longer way is that if we could ourselves learn from them, go sit with them for some time. As Bhagavad Gita says, tad-vriddhi pratipadena pariprashnena sevaya. So that's the way. We need to go there, actually learn from them for some time. And if we can spend few months, even 3-4 months, we will see that we are deeply enriched and the line of inquiry that we have started would not go wrong. It would not have so many of the impositive biases. And in the literature citation, whenever we are going to find those impositive biases, we will be able to recognize it. And we can also counter it if required. So that understanding becomes clear. So these are the two alternative ways. One is, of course, collaborating with them. Other is learning from them.
Thank you so much, Professor. It is very useful because I have seen some scholars, not here, of course. Some scholars have the habit that I work in Bhagavad Gita and then they cite some papers published here and there, and that the whole thing actually it loses the essence of what is said and what we want to bring out. So thanks for this insight. And the key takeaway is, if you want to go approach scriptures originally, original scripture and then translation in Indian languages, not in English, and also get hold of somebody who is trained in those scriptures. So thanks a lot for this insight. My one last question from my side is, you mentioned that personality is captured in the term bhava, and bhava is essentially the intrinsic being, and not necessarily which is observed by others. So I'm asking this question typically from a positivist perspective, that when we approach this kind of phenomena, is it really possible to develop a measurement for that? Because nowadays, if you have a scale, then this research can continue further.
See, what happens is that if you consider personality from a Western perspective, then you are essentially saying that you will not study one-off experiences. For example, if somebody has done something, like Dharmaraj Yudhishthira has played game of dice once or twice, so that will not mark his personality. I will not study this kind of phenomena for him. I will study what has recurred. Kurt Lewin, he started looking into that entire thing from that perspective. So unless something is recurring, it is not of interest for a positivist, because positivism is the study of regularities as such. Swabhav, on the other hand, is a causal framework, not a coordinational framework. It doesn't answer only when, it also answers why. And for that matter, every single action and thought emerges out of Swabhav. As Sri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, Swabhav jena konteya nibaddha swen karmana kartung nechasyan mohat kaishyasya vasobitat. Bound by your own forces of Swabhav, whatever you do not want to do because of delusion, because of moh, the war that you do not want to do, you will be doing as if you are bound completely. Your Swabhav will compel you to fight, because that's what you haven't done. You have been doing for whole life. So in that case, since every single thought and action and feeling emerges out of Swabhav, so therefore by observing any effect in terms of thinking, feeling and actions, its corresponding bhav can be quickly and very clearly determined. So external observation is entirely possible, but we need to understand that when we are making bhav attribution, when we are doing the bhav-based analysis or swabhav-based analysis, we are not doing what the trait theorists generally think that they are doing in terms of giving a frequency distribution, let us say behavioral frequency, treating behavioral frequency as traits, or treating something that is biological as traits, because biology pertains to only physical body, sthul sharir, whereas swabhav is supposed to be in the saral body, sukshma sharir, whose component is adhyatma, buddhi. So in that case, whatever is expressed, sthul sharir is the agency through which all the tendencies and potentials of sukshma sharir get expressed as per Sāṁkhya Yoga Vedanta. So in that system, when we are considering, every single work that we do will show stamp of swabhav already, and the inference can be very easily established based on the linkages, because all the 8 bhavas are already known to us. Sāṁkhya has given the definition. So whichever thinking, feeling and action, whatever is the mode in which this has expressed, we can understand whether it is coming from dharma, is it coming from gyan, is it coming from vairagya, etc. And as far as swabhav is concerned, the strongest of all these 8 bhavas, that will determine our swabhav, because that will keep expressing itself in most of the things that we do throughout life. Weaker bhavas will have less opportunities, but strongest bhavas will have the many more opportunities to find expression throughout life.
Okay, great. So thank you for your take. Anybody has any other question to Professor, or any thought on line of research that he presented. Okay, so I think we are okay to conclude. So I just would like to express my gratitude to Professor Kumar for taking time out and presenting this wonderful topic, a wonderful research here. And so with your permission, I'm sharing your email ID here so that
Yes.
researchers can get connected with you. The idea was this exactly this, that you get inspired by his work and so that we do something great together. So thank you so much, Professor, for your time. Thank you all. Thanks to all the participants who joined us. Thanks to all industry leaders who took time out on Friday afternoon. You joined us and you were with us. Thank you so much. I could see faculty members from other institutes. I could see research scholars from all other different institutes. Very, I'm grateful to all of you. Many thanks. And we will meet again in the next month, 11th research seminar. As I said, it will be with Professor Shishir Roy, who is working in neuroscience. So he will be presenting research on how meditation, dhyan, and different stages in meditation create a different pattern in the brain and what happens at neurological level. So it will be very thrilling to listen to him. So I extend my invitation to all of you. We'll meet again in the next month, and feel free to get connected with Professor Kumar, and I'm sure that you will get immense learning from him. So thank you so much, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ajay.
Grateful.
It has been a wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Namaste to all.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.